The new beginning expanded. The morning felt no different from the others. The same soft light filtered through the window. The same quiet hum of life outside continued. The room hadn't changed. The furniture was where it always had been, and his belongings were still in their usual places. But there was something inside him that was not the same, something subtle, something soft, something honest. He sat on the edge of his bed, his feet resting gently on the cool floor. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't trying to start the day in any particular way. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of stillness that didn't feel heavy. It felt clean. It felt like a soft breath after a long pause. He had stopped using the word depression to describe what he had been going through. Not because he didn't believe in it or because it wasn't real, but because for him that word didn't fully capture what he had felt. He had been disconnected, out of rhythm, quietly distant from himself. It hadn't been loud or dramatic. It had been slow, subtle, and difficult to notice. And now, just as quietly, he was finding his way back. He didn't make a big plan. He didn't write a long to-do list. He simply asked himself one question. What small thing can I do today that feels real? Not productive, not impressive. Just, real. He thought for a moment and remembered how he used to enjoy making his own breakfast, not rushing, not heating something from the freezer, but really preparing something. So he walked into the kitchen, boiled some water, toasted a piece of bread, and made tea. It wasn't special in anyone else's eyes, but for him it felt like a step. He ate slowly. He tasted the food. He looked out the window while sipping. His tea, he wasn't thinking about yesterday. He wasn't worried about tomorrow. He was just here, present with the taste, the warmth, the light, and that moment became his beginning, not with noise, not with a big announcement, but with awareness. He sat with his notebook again. The one he had found under his bed, the one filled with the thoughts of a more connected version of himself. He didn't try to write anything perfect. He just wrote what he was feeling now. I'm not trying to fix myself. I'm trying to return to myself. It felt like the most honest sentence he had written in months. Throughout the day, he stayed gentle with himself. He didn't try to suddenly become productive. He didn't try to catch up with everything he had avoided. He simply moved with awareness. When he walked to the market, he noticed the faces around him, not in a deep way, but in a human way. He looked at the colors of the fruits, the sound of a child laughing, the way people carried their shopping bags. Everything felt a little more alive. Just because he was paying attention, he understood now that life didn't need to be fixed, it needed to be felt. And for a long time, he hadn't been feeling it. He had been moving through it like a quiet shadow, not hurting, but not fully living either. That was changing. Not all at once, but in small, honest ways. He made a list that night. But it wasn't a goal list. It was a reminder list. He titled it, Things That Bring Me Back. Underneath, he wrote, a slow morning, making my own food. Sitting near the window, writing one honest line a day. Going for a walk with no destination. Listening to silence, watching the sky change. Drinking tea without distraction, reading without rushing. Talking to someone without checking my phone. These were not grand actions. They wouldn't make headlines, but they were real. They were his, and that's what made them powerful. Because slowly, they brought him back to the parts of himself he had forgotten, not dramatic parts. Not impressive parts, but the quiet, steady parts that make a person whole. In the following days, he didn't change everything. He didn't suddenly become a different person, but he began to notice when he was slipping into old patterns, endless scrolling, avoiding reflection, staying stuck in the same spot. And instead of being hard on himself, he gently redirected his attention. Sometimes that meant putting his phone away and stepping outside. Sometimes it meant writing a few words in his notebook. Other times it just meant sitting with himself and breathing. He found strength in slowness. He no longer believed that healing had to be fast or loud. He saw now that real change is quiet. It grows slowly, like a plant, one leaf at a time. Reaching for light without making a sound, he didn't talk much about this shift with others. Not because he wanted to hide it, but because it wasn't a story he needed to tell yet. It was still unfolding, still becoming. And it was deeply personal, not in a private way, but in a sacred way. Like something too soft to put into words. When he did speak with a friend after a long time, he didn't talk about progress or problems. He simply asked, "How are you really?" And he listened to fully. And for the first time in a long time, he felt the joy of true connection, not through advice or solutions. Just through being present, he realized that presence was the answer. He had been looking for all along, not a fix, not a cure, but the practice of showing up for his food, for his thoughts, for the people around him, for the sky above him, and most importantly for himself. This was his new beginning. Not a fresh start in the dramatic sense, but a slow return to simplicity, to honesty, to quiet presence, and he was okay with that. The simple walk expanded. He hadn't planned to go outside that evening. Like most days, he had settled into the quiet rhythm of staying indoors, scrolling through the same screens, sitting in the same spot and watching the hours pass without much notice. But something small inside him moved, not a loud voice, not a sudden energy, just a soft feeling that whispered, "Step outside." He paused, then, without overthinking, he stood up, left his phone on the table, and put on his sandals. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he wanted to walk. The air outside was cooler than he expected. It carried the smell of dust and leaves. The sky was beginning to turn orange and gold, the sun slowly folding into the horizon. The light was gentle, the kind of light that doesn't demand attention but quietly fills everything with peace. He took his first step slowly, no music in his ears, no map, no agenda. Just the sound of his footsteps and the occasional bird calling in the distance. He had walked on these streets many times before, but this time felt different. This time he was truly present. He wasn't walking to get somewhere. He wasn't walking to clear his head, he was just walking. And somehow that made it feel new again. He noticed the cracks in the sidewalk, the pattern of the leaves falling on the ground, the quiet hum of electricity in the nearby poles. These were things that had always been there. But now, he saw them dot as he passed by the neighborhood park. He saw a few children playing. Their laughter was light and unfiltered. It wasn't loud, but it filled the space around them like music. An old man sat on a bench nearby, reading a newspaper slowly, holding it with both hands like it was something sacred. A woman walked her dog. Two teenagers passed him on bicycles, speaking in broken jokes and easy smiles. Life was happening, but none of it was rushing. He kept walking. Every step felt steady, simple, his shoulders relaxed, his breathing slowed. His mind, usually filled with quiet noise, thoughts, questions, unfinished plans, now felt more open. He wasn't trying to figure anything out. He wasn't waiting for a breakthrough. He was simply noticing. The texture of the road, the rust on a gate, the way the sky changed color as the sun dropped lower. These small things began to feel large. Because he was finally paying attention, he realized something. He had been moving through life without really being in it. Even in moments of rest, he had been somewhere else, in thoughts, in screens, in waiting. But this walk was different. There was no purpose to it. And in that lack of purpose, he found a kind of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. Not excitement, not joy, just stillness. Calm, the kind of feeling that doesn't need to be shared or captured, it just needs to be felt. He walked past a row of houses, each with its own little world. One had a small garden with flowers blooming quietly. Another had an old bicycle leaning against the wall. A child peeked out from a window, holding a small toy, eyes full of questions. These small details made him think, how many moments like this had he missed before? Not because he was busy, but because he wasn't really here. A soft breeze touched his face, and with it came a memory of a time when he used to walk more often. Back then, it wasn't for fitness or routine. It was just to be with the world, to think without pressure, to breathe. Somewhere along the way, he had forgotten that part of himself. But this walk reminded him. Not through big emotions, but through quiet truth. That presence, full, simple, honest, was enough. At one corner, he stopped and leaned against a tree. The bark was rough. The shade was soft. He looked up. The sky was now mixed with pink and blue. A single star had begun to appear. Time had passed, but he hadn't noticed it. Not because he was distracted, but because he was immersed. That's what he had been missing. Not energy, not purpose. Just this, presence. The ability to be where he was fully, gently. He didn't take pictures. He didn't write notes. He didn't make promises to himself. He simply stood there, breathing, watching, being. The walk had no destination, but somehow it had brought him closer to himself than anything else had in weeks. He didn't need to solve anything right now. He just needed to be here. And for now, that was enough. He began to walk back slowly. The streetlights flickered on. A dog barked in the distance. Someone was playing soft music from an open window. He passed the park again, now quieter, the children gone. The old man had folded his newspaper. The sky had turned deeper. He could feel the day coming to an end, not with urgency, but with ease. Back at his door, he paused. He looked up at the tree near his building. Its branches moved slowly in the breeze. He placed his hand on the gate and smiled, not because something amazing had happened, but because something true had returned. A small sense of belonging. Not to a place, not to a goal, but to the present moment. When he entered his room again, it looked the same walls, same table, same chair, but something inside him was lighter. The silence didn't feel so empty now. The stillness didn't feel so cold. He sat down and poured a glass of water. Each sip felt real. Simple, meaningful. That night he didn't scroll. He didn't rush to fill the space with noise. He sat with himself. He listened. The walk hadn't fixed anything. It hadn't answered all his questions, but it reminded him that he could still feel, still see, still connect, not by doing more, but by doing less, by walking, by noticing. By returning the next day, he didn't plan another walk. He didn't need to. What mattered wasn't the walking itself. It was the awareness. The gentle reminder that he was not as lost as he thought. That peace wasn't far away. It was just hidden beneath the noise. And sometimes all it took to find it again was to step outside and take a simple walk. The forgotten self expanded. It was a slow afternoon, the kind where nothing called for attention. The sunlight through the window didn't seem interested in anything. The air was still. The room was quiet. He wasn't doing much, just sitting on the edge of his bed, looking at the floor. His mind wasn't busy, but it wasn't quiet either. Thoughts moved slowly, like leaves floating in water. There was no rush to think them through. He leaned forward to tie his shoelaces, but stopped. Halfway. He wasn't going anywhere. He hadn't been going anywhere for a while. Without much thought, he bent down to look under his bed. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, maybe just a moment of distraction. His fingers touched an old notebook, dusty, slightly bent, forgotten. He pulled it out, brushed it off, and flipped through the pages. The handwriting was his, but the voice inside the words felt like someone else's. Someone younger. Someone clearer. Someone with more light. He turned to the first page. It was dated 2 years ago. "Things I want to do this year," it said in bold, underlined letters. There was a list. Some big goals, some small ones. Some crossed off, some left untouched. "Write more," one said. "Visit the mountains. Learn to cook 3 proper meals. Wake up early. Talk to people with full attention." He smiled a little. Not because of the goals, but because he remembered the feeling behind them, the quiet excitement, the gentle belief that life was still something he could shape. He flipped more pages. He found paragraphs he had forgotten. Reflections on books he had read, thoughts about people he missed, questions he had asked himself at night. There were moments of confusion in those pages too, but they were full of life. Even the sadness had a kind of clarity. The person who wrote those words was searching, asking, trying. Not sitting in silence, not scrolling for hours, not feeling like time was just something to survive. That notebook brought him back to a version of himself he had buried. Not on purpose, just over time, slowly, quietly, unknowingly. Life had kept moving, but somewhere along the way, he had stopped participating. He hadn't noticed the exact moment when his days became gray and repetitive. He hadn't seen the change in the mirror. But now, reading those pages, he felt it clearly. He had forgotten who he was. It wasn't about ambition. He didn't care much for success the way some people talked about it. It was about presence, energy, purpose. That version of him, the one who wrote freely in the notebook, had ideas, questions, wonder. He didn't have all the answers, but he had interest. He cared. He showed up for himself. And now, looking back, he realized how quiet he had become. Not in voice, but in spirit. He thought about what had changed since then. Nothing dramatic. Really, no big loss. No crisis, just the slow weight of daily life. One responsibility here, one disappointment there. A few too many days spent waiting for motivation that never came. A few too many hours lost in screens, distractions, and shallow noise. The world hadn't hurt him. It had just quietly pulled him away from himself. The notebook reminded him of small things he used to do. He had once kept a gratitude list. Just one line a day. The sound of rain today. The smell of fresh tea, a stranger's smile, a good night's sleep. It had seemed silly at first, but now he saw the value. Back then, he had trained his mind to look for beauty, and now, beauty passed by him every day. Unnoticed, he didn't blame himself. He just felt a gentle sadness. Not for the lost days, but for forgetting to live them. He turned another page and saw a sketch. A simple one, a tree, some clouds, a small path. He didn't remember drawing it, but he remembered how it felt to sit in the corner of his room and sketch without pressure. He didn't do it to be good. He did it because it made him feel quiet and connected. When had he stopped doing that? When had he decided there wasn't time anymore, or that it didn't matter? He stood up and walked around the room slowly, looking at his space like it was new. The books on the shelf, some half-read, some never opened. The clothes in the corner, the cold cup of tea on the desk. Everything looked normal, but it felt like a museum of paused intentions. He wasn't disappointed in himself. He was just surprised at how easy it had been to lose touch with the person he used to be. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel tired. He didn't feel fully alive either. But he felt something in between, like a thread had been reconnected. A soft line between who he was and who he had become. Not to judge, but to understand, he sat back down with the notebook and wrote a single sentence. I remember now. Then another, it's still in me. He didn't know what to do next. He didn't make a plan. But that small act of remembering was enough. It was a seed, not a solution. But it didn't need to be more than that. The rest of the day passed. Like before, slowly, quietly, but something had shifted. He looked at the window with more awareness. He felt the floor under his feet. He paid attention to his breath. Small things, but real. Over the next few days, he kept the notebook on his table. He didn't write in it every day, but he opened it often. He read his old words and let them remind him of who he was. Not to go back, but to bring something forward. That voice, that clarity, that presence, it was still there. Just quieter now, but not gone. He started noticing patterns. How easy it was to live without noticing. How often he reached for his phone when he didn't need to. How quickly time passed when it wasn't filled with meaning. He didn't blame himself for any of it. He just started watching, observing, like a quiet student of his own life. He remembered how he used to ask himself small questions. What made me smile today? What did I learn? What did I feel when I heard that song? He had stopped asking. But now he wanted to begin again, gently, slowly, no pressure. Just simple attention. One morning he made tea and sat with the window open. The air was cool, the street was quiet, and the sky had a soft blue color. He didn't take a picture, he didn't share it. He just sat with it. He whispered to himself, this matters, not loudly, not dramatically. Just honestly. He didn't try to get back to who he used to be. He didn't need to be the same person. But he wanted to live with the same openness, the same care, the same quiet energy that made life feel like something he was a part of, not just something happening around him. The forgotten self was not truly lost, just buried, covered by days without attention, by habits that numbed instead of nourished. But now, little by little, he was uncovering it. Not with force, not with plans, just with honesty, and that was enough. That was the beginning. The same day, every day expanded, the days had started to blur. He couldn't remember when exactly the routine had taken over, but now it was always the same. Wake up late. Stay in bed longer than needed. Pick up the phone before doing anything. Else, scroll through notifications that didn't matter. Look at faces, words, updates, all moving fast, but feel nothing. No urgency, no curiosity, no sense of direction. He would put the phone down eventually, but even that felt like a small chore. The morning sunlight would slip through the curtain and touch the walls gently, but he barely noticed anymore. Every day had begun to feel like a quiet repeat of the last, and there was no clear reason why he wasn't overwhelmed with sadness. He wasn't in pain, but there was a strange kind of numbness, not physical, but emotional, that stayed with him. It was as if the world had lost its edges. Everything felt soft, muted, like living inside a fog that never lifted. His body moved, but his mind felt stuck. He did what was necessary, brushed his teeth, drank water, sometimes made tea, but there was no motivation behind the actions. They were just habits now, quiet, automatic steps to get through another day that looked just like the one before. He remembered a time when mornings had meaning. When he had a reason to get up, a class, a plan, a project, a meeting with a friend, those moments had structure. Now even the clock on the wall felt more alive than he did. It ticked forward, steady and sure, while he drifted slowly through hours that felt both fast and endless. He didn't feel broken, he didn't feel dramatic. He just felt lost in repetition. Sometimes he thought about changing his routine. He'd tell himself, tomorrow I'll wake up early, I'll go outside. I'll make something good to eat. I'll read instead of scrolling. But when tomorrow came, it felt just like today. The motivation he imagined didn't arrive. The energy didn't return, and slowly he started to stop making promises to himself. Not because he didn't care, but because he was tired of disappointing himself. He didn't hate his life. That was the strange part. He just didn't feel connected to it anymore. It was like watching someone else go through the motions while he stood in the background, invisible. Some days he would look in the mirror and feel like he was looking at someone familiar, but distant. His eyes looked tired, but not from sleeplessness, from a quiet fatigue that came from too many unspoken thoughts and too little meaning. The same meals, the same playlist, the same chair, the same walk from one room to another. It wasn't suffering. It was something quieter, harder to explain. It wasn't that he didn't want change, he just didn't know where to begin. Every idea felt too big, and every action felt too small to matter. He knew people would say things like, just start or take the first step. And he wasn't against those ideas, he just didn't feel ready. Not in a lazy way, in a disconnected way. He felt like a part of him had gone quiet, and he was waiting for it to speak again. But days turned into weeks, and that voice stayed silent. Sometimes he would sit on the floor and try to remember what joy used to feel like. Not the big kind, but the simple kind, like laughing with someone, finishing a good book, or walking under the evening sky. Those memories came, but they felt far away, like old dreams from another life. He wasn't sad that they were gone. He just didn't know how to bring them back. He had friends, but he started drifting away from them without meaning to. He didn't reply quickly anymore. He didn't share updates about his life because he didn't feel like there was anything new to say. Conversations became tiring. Not because they were hard, but because he couldn't find the energy to connect. It wasn't about others, it was about him. He didn't feel present enough in his own life to share it with someone else. The afternoons were the hardest. They stretched on with a strange silence. He would sit by the window and look outside. Cars moving, birds flying, people walking with purpose. The world was alive, but he felt like he was paused, not broken, not behind. Just paused. Like a video that had stopped playing, waiting for someone to press play again. Sometimes he would open a notebook, write 1 or 2 sentences, and close it again. The words didn't feel right. They didn't feel enough. And yet, even writing A single line gave him a moment of clarity. A small reminder that he still had thoughts, even if they were quiet. He wasn't empty, just quiet. Night came slowly, just like the day. He didn't look forward to it, but he didn't mind it either. He would lie in bed and scroll again. Not because he wanted to, just because it filled the silence. He saw people smiling, laughing, achieving things, sharing updates that looked full of life, and he didn't feel jealous. He felt disconnected, like those lives were happening in another world. He wondered if something was wrong with him. But every time he asked himself that question, the answer felt unclear. He didn't feel sick. He didn't feel desperate. He felt stuck, not in a dark place, but in a flat one. A place where nothing changed, nothing surprised, and nothing stirred the heart. He didn't tell many people about how he felt. It wasn't because he wanted to hide. It was because he didn't know how to explain it. I feel the same every day. Didn't sound serious, but it was. It was a slow kind of fading, not painful, but quiet. The kind where your days don't hurt, but they don't heal you either. He started noticing how many of his habits were based on avoiding something. Avoiding silence, avoiding effort, avoiding thought. He wasn't lazy, he was lost. The difference was subtle, but important. He wasn't choosing this. It had slowly become his life, one day at a time, without him realizing it. One evening, he turned off his phone early. He sat with a notebook and wrote, "I don't think I have depression. I think I'm just living without direction." It wasn't a diagnosis, it was a thought. But it helped. He realized he didn't need a label. He needed clarity. He wrote more. "I wake up, but I don't rise. I move, but I don't feel moved. I eat, but I don't taste. I smile, but I don't connect. I exist, but I don't live." The words weren't poetry. They were reflections. Honest, soft truths that didn't demand attention but deserved it. He read them again and felt something shift, not a solution. Not a plan, but a small opening, like a window cracked just enough to let fresh air, and that night, for the first time in weeks, he didn't scroll. He lay in bed and looked at the ceiling, then closed his eyes and just breathed. The silence was still there. The routine would still be there tomorrow. But something small had changed. He had named the feeling, not depression, but disconnection. And now he could begin, not by escaping the routine, but by gently reshaping it, one small step at a time. Not to fix himself, but to return to himself. The silence in the room expanded. He sat quietly in his small room. The kind of silence that didn't ask for attention but filled every corner. The light from the window was soft, neither too bright nor too dim, just enough to see everything clearly without needing to turn on a bulb. There was a bed, a table, a chair, and some books on a shelf. Nothing unusual, nothing that stood out. He had lived in this room for some time, and yet it felt unfamiliar these days, like he was only visiting. The clock ticked steadily on the wall, but he didn't look at it. Time was passing, but he had stopped measuring it the usual way. He wasn't crying. He wasn't overwhelmed. He wasn't thinking deeply either. He was just sitting, still, calm, disconnected. It wasn't the kind of pain that screamed. It was more like a quiet dullness that sat in his chest and stayed there. A few people had told him it looked like he might be depressed. He had seen videos online, read posts about symptoms, and listened to what others said. It all sounded familiar: tiredness, low energy, not enjoying things anymore, not wanting to talk. But something inside him was not fully convinced. He didn't feel broken. He just felt lost. The room was clean but not organized. A shirt was draped over the chair. His phone lay face down on the table. A half-empty glass of water sat on the windowsill. Nothing was wrong in a serious way, but everything felt off in a quiet way. He wasn't avoiding people out of fear. He just didn't feel like being around anyone. Conversations felt like effort, even if they were short. He would type replies to messages and then delete them. It wasn't that he had nothing to say. He just didn't feel the point of saying it. There was a time when he used to love this room. He had arranged it himself, picked the curtains, set up a small shelf for books, placed a lamp by the bed. He had even written in a journal once, noting how this was his personal space for peace and ideas. But now, even though nothing had changed physically, it didn't feel like his anymore. The silence that used to calm him now felt like distance. He wasn't afraid of it, but he didn't feel comforted by it either. It just existed like everything else. He tried to remember when this feeling started, but no clear moment came to mind. It wasn't a sudden fall, it was more like a slow fade. One day, he didn't go for his evening walk. Then, he stopped reading the book he had been enjoying. Calls from friends started going unanswered. He told himself he was just tired, but the tiredness stayed. Weeks went by. He wasn't sad every day, just empty. Not the kind of emptiness that hurt, but the kind that made everything feel gray. His sleep wasn't bad, but it wasn't restful either. He would lie in bed for hours, eyes closed, mind quiet but not asleep. Sometimes he would wake up feeling heavier than when he slept. There were no nightmares, no bad dreams. Just a strange feeling of weight, not on his body, but on his mind. He didn't dread waking up. He just didn't look forward to it. The days had become quiet repetitions of the same pattern. Get up, eat something simple, scroll for a while, sit, maybe nap, and then sleep again. He knew he could go out. There was a park nearby. A friend had invited him to coffee a few days ago. He could reply to texts, join a class, or watch something meaningful, but none of these things felt real in that moment. They were like ideas from another life. It wasn't that he didn't care. He just didn't feel the connection to any of it, like he was observing his own life from a distance. Once, he opened his notes app and typed a question. What's wrong with me? He stared at the screen for a while, waiting for some answer to appear in his mind, but nothing did. He didn't even feel anxious about it. He just closed the app and went back to sitting quietly. There was no urgency, no breakdown, just silence. People around him had good intentions. They suggested things: meditation, exercise, a change in routine. Some said maybe he was just burned out. Others used the word depression kindly, like they were offering an explanation that could help. But he didn't feel like anything was broken inside. He didn't feel like something was missing. He felt like something had just paused. Like a part of him had taken a step back and was waiting. He thought back to his younger days. He remembered how he used to wake up with ideas, plans for the day, things he wanted to try, conversations he looked forward to. Now there was none of that, not because life had become hard. Nothing dramatic had happened, but the feeling was gone. That gentle push from within, the one that made him want to do things, had faded. What replaced it was a neutral stillness. Not dark, but not light either. He noticed how he had stopped noticing small things. He used to find beauty in a cloudy sky, or the smell of rain, or the sound of birds in the morning. Now those things passed by without leaving a mark. It was like he had put a layer of glass between himself and the world. He could still see it, but he couldn't feel it the same way. One day he sat near the window for an hour, just watching the street. People walked by, children played, bikes passed, someone was watering plants. Life continued. And he felt like an observer, like someone who was no longer part of it. It didn't make him sad. It just made him thoughtful. What had changed? Why did everything feel so far away? He didn't want to label himself. He wasn't rejecting help or denying something serious. He just wanted to understand. Was it really depression? Or was it something else, something deeper, quieter, and harder to name? He started writing a few words in his notebook. Not full sentences, just scattered thoughts. Maybe I'm just tired of pretending. Maybe I missed something I never had. Maybe I'm not lost, just paused. As he wrote, he didn't feel better, but he felt more real. Like he was gently knocking on the door of his own self again. That night he didn't reach for his phone. He just lay in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. The fan made the same soft sound. The silence was still there. But this time he wasn't running from it. He was listening. He knew this wasn't the end of the story. He didn't expect a sudden change. But he had stopped fighting the silence. He had accepted that maybe he wasn't depressed in the way the word is often used. Maybe he was just deeply out of sync with himself. Maybe what he needed was not a fix, but a slow return. As he drifted into sleep, he thought of one simple idea. I don't need to figure everything out. I just need to keep listening. And that's where it began, not with a solution, not with a breakthrough, but with a small, quiet willingness to stay present in the silence and let it speak.